Trying to find my way, 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 trying to find my way. I'm trying to change me.
My faith is in God alone, beyond a reasonable doubt. This brainstorm, pouring rain on your season of drought. Just trying to lay a couple seeds in the mouth. Thanks for listening. You ever get the feeling you was missing it?
Good. So we want to have a late night conversation. We attempted to have this conversation a little earlier today, and we ran into some technical difficulties with Zoom, the platform, and we have just kind of gotten it resolved, although it is nearly midnight. So if you can, if you're up, hit share. We want to at least get about 20, 25 people on tonight. And
catch up with our West Coasters.
Oh yeah. West Coast. It's about 9 o'clock. It's still early over on the West Coast. So
the best coast.
Oh, all right.
The mess coast. The mess coast.
The less coast?
The less coast. All that rhymes. There's a reason for that.
Right. Haters.
All right. So we're at about, it looks like about 16. Hit share. We want to have a great conversation tonight about the state of urban apologetics. Make sure you wake somebody up that is interested in apologetics, somebody that's practicing apologetics, anybody that you know is involved in any kind of level of Christian debate, intense dialogue and discussion. We're at about 18, almost at 20. Hit that share button so that we could have a really interesting conversation tonight. Looks like we're kind of dropping down there, so we don't want that. We want to get over 20. Well, all right. Well, I think we may as well just go ahead and jump into this conversation tonight.
Let's get it.
All right, good deal. So this is as we had previously discussed. This is a kind of a extemporaneous, freestyling kind of discussion, but we want to talk about where we are as an urban apologetics community and some of the things that we are seeing on Facebook with some of the various interactions in the Christian community, particularly those who are interacting with urban apologists and who are kind of engaging in urban apologetics or what have you. So we want to kind of have a discussion about what we're seeing, the state of what we're seeing, some of the conversations, the debates, the dialogues, and the just the whole the tension that's been created more recently with some of the recent discussions. And so I'm going to turn it over to either one of you to jump in and just tell us what you're seeing and, some of your thoughts on the state of urban apologetics.
Well, yeah, man. Isaiah, you want to go first, man? Or what you want to do, bro?
Go for it, bro.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important discussion to have because I think what you have, what we have now in terms of this urban apologetics community, which is, really flourishing online is something very unique. I think it's something special. You just really, up until, maybe the last couple of years, you haven't had a push from Christians to address the apologetics related issues that are specific to the African-American context and the, even more broadly, just among African people in the Western world in general. It's just like, I really feel like we've got a new push, that just hasn't really been there before. And I think it's afforded us a really, just an awesome opportunity to really harness that and make an impact, to really push back against, the conscious community, which has been taking jabs at us for the longest. And, we just haven't had a response. And so I think from what I've seen, I know myself, I got into it on the apologetic side, just because I was running into these different objections from the Comedics, from the Hebrew Israelites, from various different folks, and I wasn't aware of anybody who was addressing it. And so I decided, okay, well, maybe I'll go ahead and do something. And I think you have a lot of people like that who are seeing the need for urban apologetics and then getting involved. And we're all kind of getting involved in our own spaces. And because of the nature of the way social media is, we're able to find each other online, hook up, and in some cases, work together. And I think that's just really how this urban apologetics community has kind of formed. And then you have other people who may not be interested in being a quote apologist, but they're just refreshed knowing that, there's somebody out here battling this stuff. And so then they kind of come into the community, being enriched by it and whatever. I think this is a really powerful opportunity we have to build on that, to build on this newness and this excitement. With that being said, a lot of people know my background in social work, and I've done a lot with group therapy and all that kind of stuff. And one thing that's common is that you go through what's called the storming and norming phase, where you get past the honeymoon phase, you have people who are of like mind, of like interest. And then all of a sudden you find that just like in any other setting, there's going to be, reasons for, disagreement, things like that. And how you work through those things determine how effective you can be moving forward. And I feel like that's where we are. I mean, not to, lay it all out there at once, but I just want to say this one last piece. I'm going to let Isaiah Robertson come in. But, I was talking to Vocab, and I told him, months ago, that I was thinking about doing a show called Fault Lines, and I was thinking about doing it right around the time where there was a lot of beef and tension going on regarding James White, race and so forth, within the urban apologetics community. And I was kind of taking, just like, we have an earthquake, you've got fault lines that have been there the whole time. Fault lines is that underground fracture among the tectonic plates or whatever. It's been there the whole time, but you don't know it's there until boom, there's friction, and all of a sudden it causes a lot of problems. And I think there are fault lines amongst the urban apologetics community, including race. How do we navigate the racial issues, like with James White, reform versus not reform, presuppositional versus evidential apologetics. That hasn't popped up yet, but I suspect that it probably will at some point. In some other settings, we see old earth creationism versus young earth creationism. All the different schisms that we see in the broader church that just haven't emerged yet in the urban apologetics community, I think those are fault lines. And what we have an opportunity to do, given that this is so new, we have the opportunity to, I think, establish some things so that maybe it doesn't cause the kind of fractures, that it has in other contexts. And I think that's what I'm seeing. I mean, I've been fortunate, there are people who were doing urban apologetics way before I came along. So, I'm not trying to make it seem as though I'm like an authority or something like that. But my goal in launching Tru-ID podcast was to, give these different people doing urban apologetics a voice and a platform to get their information out there. And in the course of doing that, I've met a lot of great people. I've met a lot of great apologists, a lot of people who have been out there grinding. And with that being said, sometimes they don't all get along. And I think that there's things that maybe we can institute that will, smooth things out a little bit. And I think that's what we're all about here.
Yeah, I agree. What do you think about that, Isaiah?
Yeah, so I mean,
I think this is a really
God's definitely using this movement. He's saving people by his grace as a result of this movement. I'm excited to see cats excited about engaging and dialoguing with people within the urban context. And I hesitate to use that word urban nowadays because it's got so many different meanings to it. But, what I'm also seeing is, anybody can kind of come onto Facebook, come on to Instagram with the label or the title urban apologist and, kind of make a claim that they're some type of expert, and they'll garner an audience. And, we don't know who this person is. We don't necessarily know what this person believes. We don't know if they're connected to a local church. We don't know really anything about them. All we know is that they are presenting themselves as kind of urban apologists. And the reality is, you know, if some guys, you know, comes out there and says that they're an urban apologist, then automatically, Damon, they're representing you. And Adam, they're representing you. And Jay, they're representing you. And all the audience sees is, oh, this guy's an urban apologist, just like Damon Richardson. And sort of we're all kind of lumped into one barrel, and there are people, you know, carrying this torch that frankly shouldn't be. You know what I mean? You know, by God's grace, cats are getting saved. They're becoming Christians. But some of them are so quick to, you know, press the play button and you know, rather than sitting and being discipled and learning and being taught and really kind of understanding this faith that's so deep and so complex and so multifaceted, you know, because they had a voice in whatever they were involved in before, you know, they get saved, and now automatically, you know, they read a few books, and it's like, okay, I'm ready to put on the urban apologist hat, and I'm ready to get out there, and some of these cats are really effective in dialoguing with, you know, Hebrew Israelites, because some of them, you know, come from that context. Some of them really effective in dialoguing with Kemetic cats. But when it comes to kind of intra, you know, Christian conversations with other believers, some of these guys really don't know the different traditions within Protestant Christianity. They don't, you know, a lot of them don't really know the different viewpoints and perspectives. You know, they don't really understand yet the complex and multifaceted nature of our faith. And so, although they're good dealing with, you know, some of those mystery cults and, you know, some of those groups that they come from, when it comes to now dialoguing with brothers and sisters in the faith, you know, there's some stumbling there. And so I think God is using it. I think, you know, I was talking to Damon actually, and, you know, we were talking about some of the inroads that urban apologists have made already in this dialogue and discussion that we're having. And Damon made a good point. He was like, you know, it used to be just months ago when you got into a conversation with, you know, a Kemetic cat, Hebrew Israelite cat, whatever, the first thing that they would do is respond with a meme. You know what I mean? And they would just plaster you with memes, just spam you with memes. But that's not as common anymore. You know what I mean? I mean, it happens. I'm not saying that doesn't happen still, but it doesn't happen, you know, as much as it used to happen. It seems like people are kind of moving away from the meme theology. And I think that's as a result of a concerted effort of urban apologists kind of, you know, calling it out and saying posting a meme isn't doing research. And so I think we're making inroads, but, you know, we have to be honest. Right now, it's the wild, wild west out here. You know what I'm saying? And we've got to take a look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to come back on that too, man, because I know for myself, and I'm not trying to make myself, you know, seem like anything, but like I take this very seriously. You know what I'm saying? Because I've got family members who are, you know, members of the conscious community. I got family members that are atheists, you know, like, and anytime I'm doing a podcast, anytime I write an article, you know, or whatever I'm doing, I'm always praying that God equip me, you know, and use me in a way that I hope he's using somebody for my family. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I go so hard at it. You know what I mean? And I think that, to your point, I feel like you've got guys out here who really don't take it seriously. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like a fun thing to do. You know, let me just go make this video right quick. You know, let me post this meme right quick. I mean, that's cool. I mean, you know, I'm not saying everybody has to be, you know, a full-time apologist, but just as a matter of fact, it's funny. Like, you know, it's maybe 2 months ago, I finally felt comfortable calling myself an apologist. I rarely use that term in reference to myself. You know what I'm saying, and it's because I think that there's more to it than just, you know, knowing stuff. You see what I'm saying? It's truly ministry. Now, I'm not trying to make it seem as though it's like a fivefold ministry gift. We have to be careful to keep it in its right place. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a pastor. I ain't nobody's pastor. Don't listen to Tru-ID instead of going to church. You see what I'm saying? You need to be linked up with a local body. But to at the same time, we can't take this thing lightly, man. I get emails from people, tune into the show, or, and they be like, man, I heard about you from Damon, or I heard about you from, matter of fact, Isaiah Robertson, coming to the Truth Summit. You know what I'm saying? Hey, man, I saw you on that video or whatever. And people have come to Christ, and spoken of how, what I do has been instrumental in that, and I don't take that lightly, you know what I'm saying? And I don't think anybody else should either. And so, to your point, I know we're going to dig into this, but I do agree that we have to it is the wild, wild west right now. It's just kind of anything goes. And to a degree, that's the nature of social media. But one thing I would hope is that we can remember that, those of us who name the name of Christ, really, this community online is just an extension of who we are as the ecclesia. And the same biblical principles that we find guiding how brethren in Christ should interact with one another applies to the online community. You know what I'm saying? Just because you're online, you got a cool profile pic or whatever, that, it's not like a different world or something like that. I don't know if people seen Ready Player One or something like that movie that just came out, or Avatar or something. It's not like that. We're still ecclesia, we're still the body. And I think what we need to do is remind ourselves of that and just, really adopt, incorporate what the Bible has to say, into this urban apologetics online community such that we can be more productive,
Yeah, I agree with all of the sentiments that have been shared.
Sound low, Damon.
Let me.
Your volume is low.
You must have a Bluetooth.
No. I'm using the regular audio. Is it not coming through?
All guys use Bluetooth.
Man,
he's taking a jab. I think it was a jab. Kyrie Irving taking the jab.
Let's see. Can you hear me now, or
That's a little bit better.
Okay. Let me put my my earpiece in. What's happening there? Is that better? Is that pretty good or no?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, good. Yeah, so one of the things that we talked about last week, we had a conversation. I think that we should. I think it would be good if we shared a little bit of that conversation with the audience.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about is that we need to have some more convention around doctrine. So in other words, we have thrown around the idea of creating a doctrinal statement for persons who have they've earned some stripes in doing apologetics, and maybe even those who are moving in that direction. But kind of as a community, an online community, we want to really create some more unity around what we believe essentially as Christians. And so, of course, we know that there are non-essentials that we're all going to disagree on, but those things are what we call intramural. We don't divide over those things. We, as that famous saying is, in essentials unity and non-essentials liberty, but in all things charity. What we have been seeing is that there is a lot of division between people who are doing apologetics. There's a lot of division in terms of people calling other brothers and sisters heretics on the issues that are not essential to the Christian faith. And so what a lot of these individuals don't understand, and it's been brought out several times, a lot of this is because of immaturity. Some of it is just natural immaturity. Some of it is spiritual immaturity. There are those who have not been properly discipled. And so what they don't realize is that they're really creating division in the body by calling a person that they disagree with regarding a non-essential, by calling that person a false teacher or a heretic. That is divisive.
And so I think one of the things that we need to be able to kind of dial back on is this kind of practice, because the world is looking at it. And it's one thing for us to have intramural, respectful, in-house debates, but it's another thing for us to actually be fighting each other as though, as though we're cults, as though we're dealing with people who are part of a cult. So we talked about creating a doctrinal statement of faith, and we're actually working on putting that together. And I'll just throw out a couple of the elements of that doctrinal statement. Some of the things.
Before you go there, can I say something real quick?
Absolutely.
Before we get into that, because I wanted to make a couple. Because I know how people think.
I want to say something after you too, Adam. After you get done.
Okay, cool. I just want to say two quick things. Number one, I already know how cats get down. The question is going to come up. Who are you guys to speak for the urban apologetics community, or who are you guys, like, what, by what authority? All those kinds of things. And I just want to throw out there. I mean, as we're discussing these things, the urban apologetics community is right now is so fragmented. I'm saying it is so, just kind of nebulous that if you just let it fall together, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, obviously that's not going to be a good thing. I mean, we see the conflict that's going on now, and and basically what we're bringing to the table as we're a group of individuals who care about the urban apologetics community.
Absolutely.
Care about the urban apologetics community, such that we don't want to just kind of flow together any kind of way, and we want to broach the conversation. As a matter of fact, I meant to mention this earlier before we got on, but I want to put my email out there, for anybody who has thoughts, in terms of what we're discussing here and would like to have some input or just have, share their perspective. You can hit me up at Tru-ID7@gmail.com. So that's TRUID7@gmail.com. And we're going to try to set up a website. I know Isaiah Robertson, you mentioned that the other day. I haven't got there yet, but until then, people can hit me up at the email, and I'll pass it along, and we can kind of just have this broader discussion. So that's one thing. We're people who care about the community, and we're opening up the discussion on ways that we can, work together more effectively. That's one thing. Number two, the reason why it's so important. And this is not something we can miss. Like, when you think about the nature, or I guess you could say the structure of the conscious community, right? You've got different belief systems who form together in loose kind of ways. So, for example, like the Hebrew Israelites, might be one group, the Moors, the Comedics, your African spiritualists, your Black atheists. These are all different groups who have very different worldviews, and they come together under the umbrella, that at the end of the day, the white man is in the wrong, and Christianity is the white man's religion, something along those lines. We need to get back to our indigenous selves. Like, that's their unifying point, right? For us, given that they have so much fraction in the conscious community, I think one of the main advantages that we have is the fact that we are one body, one Lord, one faith, one Lord, one baptism. I'm sure I got the order of that wrong, but y'all know what I'm saying. We're one body. And we can actually use the unity of the cross, unity under the cross, right? That's an effective tool to then, go out and disrupt, what's going on from the conscious community in terms of battering against the truth of the gospel. So we have to understand that our unity is valuable, our unity is precious, and we ought not sacrifice it just willy-nilly because we disagree with somebody, because ultimately we then impair our ability to go out and preach the gospel. I mean, while we're making videos about each other, I'm not going to name any names, but these false teachers out here, they might have 19,000 views on a video, 20,000 views on a video. While we going back and forth at each other, they're still getting it in. And we can't allow ourselves to just be handicapped, basically stumbling over our own feet while the enemy is out here kicking tail with the kingdom of darkness. So I just wanted to just make those two quick.
And I also want to say this, y'all. This isn't meant to shade anybody, because I know how kind of things have been going within the urban apologist community. You'll listen to what someone says and automatically say, well, oh, he's talking about him, or he's talking about him, or he's implying this group or this person. This conversation isn't meant to shade anybody. We're not thinking about a particular individual or a particular group. We're just talking about some of our observations as we've seen things transpire. So if you're on here and you're listening and you think, that you're being referred to, or you think that we're singling you out, hit us up. Hit us in our inbox. I'm more than willing kind of to tell you some of the frustration that I've had, and who's caused some of the frustration. I'm more than willing to kind of tell you where I'm at, what my thoughts are, and I'm more than willing to tell you, and I believe Damon and Adam are as well. We're willing to tell you, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities for improvement, and we would take the same feedback as well. Again, we're not standing here as the ultimate authorities, right? So our prayer is that, as you listen to us talk, you'll listen to it in a spirit of love, understanding that we want to win, right? And we all win together when we're all on the same page. So just know that no shade is meant to anybody.
Exactly.
And if you feel offended by anything said, hit us up. Don't have a live after this one, or 2 days after this one. Those brothers, if you feel offended, hit us up. Let's talk through it, because we're doing this in love and out of love, and we just want to see the community get better and mature. So go ahead, Damon.
Yeah. So just some of the things that we're seeing. Let's just talk about some of the things that we're seeing. Number one, there's this raging debate between reformed and non-reformed, right? And some of us are on different sides of those theological views. What we're not seeing, though, is what we're not seeing is love. We're not seeing. Okay, let me just put it out there like this. I've heard people go as far as saying that those who believe in election or predestination are heretics, and and then you've got those who are on the other side of that discussion who have gone as far as saying, well, if you don't believe in election and predestination, then you don't actually even believe the gospel. So those are examples of some of the things that are going on out there within the community of people who are identifying themselves as urban apologists or whatever. So we're seeing a lot of those kinds of discussions. We're seeing where people who are authentic Bible believing Christians that believe in the essentials of the historic Christian faith being called false teachers and heretics because they are disagreeing with some other area of non-essentiality. So that kind of thing has got to stop. I think some of the other things that we're seeing is that there are people who are identifying themselves as apologists, particularly urban apologists. Some of these people don't belong to church. They don't belong to anybody's church. Mm-hmm. And when you look a little further, you investigate, you look closer, you begin to find that some of these people have strong anti-church kind of views. They themselves don't belong to church. And so that's also problematic, because when that person starts drifting off theologically and doctrinally, who are they accountable to? Who's there to correct that person? And the problem is that they're in a position to influence people, especially when they have identified themselves as part of an online community. It almost gives them free endorsement. They're able to kind of ride in on this endorsement, so to speak, by identifying and being associated with a group of people who have a reputation for being sound in the faith and so forth and so on. So So not belonging to a church is a problem. That's problematic. And so we've got to get some more structure around this kind of community, especially since this community meets often online. And obviously we do have conferences and things, that summits. And in fact, we've done the Truth Summit in Cartersville, Georgia, somewhere earlier in the year. And we're going to be doing it again in Boston on next weekend, Truth Summit Boston next week. And there are a number of different conferences that are the One Truth. And
hold on, Damon. Listen, you can't just skim over. We're gonna do it in Boston next week. We need to pin it right there and take some time and talk about this. Who taught you? Come on, talk to the people, man.
Yeah, well, okay, so let's talk about that, because I think that is important as well. These kinds of conferences that we're doing are designed to not only inform believers about some of the issues that are out there that are contrary to our faith, but these kinds of apologetic summits that we're doing, they're being held because we want to be able to equip people as well. We at the end of the day, apologetics is for all believers.
Amen.
1 Peter 3:15 doesn't have the professional apologist in mind. It has the average Christian with the boots on the ground in mind. And so I think that's one of the areas that the urban apologetics community gets it right, is we didn't start out with, let's say, all scholars and start moving towards that. We started out with grassroots Christians that are saying, hey, let's have some discussions with the Nation of Islam or the Nuwabians or the Black Hebrew Israelites or whatever. So I think we don't have to worry about the direction that we're moving in. What we need to do is just put some more structure around it. So in Boston next weekend, Friday and Saturday, we're going to be having some more of the same kinds of workshops and seminars that we did in Cartersville a number of months ago. We're going to be talking about what really happened at the Council of Nicaea. We're going to be talking about the African. We're going to be talking about African Christianity, literally Christianity on the continent of Africa in the first several centuries. We'll be talking about, of course, the Black Hebrew Israelites and a number of different topics that many of these things have been covered in other places, but we're going to be equipping believers to be able to take this information and utilize it relationally wherever they are. But I think it's really important that we start really nailing down some fine points of doctrine with people who are engaging and participating in the urban apologetics community. So we need to know what you believe. Just to put it out there, frankly, we know a lot about what you don't believe, because that's the part that often gets highlighted the most, is what you don't believe. I don't believe this. I don't believe that or the other. But we really need to know what you believe. We need to know. So for instance, here's just a few of the elements.
Can I chime in on that too? I keep cutting you off every time you're getting ready to get into the list. but seriously though, I mean, the other side of it is too, and this really just occurred to me, but not only, do we need to know that people are a reliable source of information. I mean, that just makes sense, right? But the flip side is, if you want to get into doing urban apologetics or just any kind of apologetics, having your church family aware of what you're doing, involved in what you're doing to whatever extent that is possible, is really for your own good. It's really for your own good. I mean, the scriptures talk about, I want to say it's in Proverbs that, in the counsel of many, there's wisdom, when I go, a perfect example. So when I went down to the Truth Summit, down there with you guys, I didn't even feel comfortable, getting in the vehicle to get down there without letting my pastor know where I was going to be, where I was going to be and what I'm doing. I'm saying I couldn't get to him directly, but I spoke to an associate pastor, just somebody in leadership. They were able to pray with me. They were able to, give me some, some wisdom as to, just kind of how to conduct myself and those kind of things. I wouldn't even feel comfortable going to somebody else's church and speaking without my own leadership, at least being aware of what it is that I do in general. At least something. You see what I'm saying? And it's really for your own safety. People have different perspectives on, demonology and all that kind of stuff. But at very least, you want to have, your elders and leaders and those you fellowship with in prayer with you. You know what I'm saying? And just it's a matter of accountability, as well. Right now, my pastor he might be watching me right now. It's kind of late right now, but maybe he's not. But he could be. You know what I'm saying? And that kind of checks me and say, okay, well, I know I can't just say whatever. You know what I'm saying? I can't just say whatever I want to say. And then even just having a heart for the people. I just seen my man Baron. I just seen him on this chat here. And I remember meeting him down there at the True Summit. When I'm doing stuff, I think about guys like that. I'm like, man, I can't just be saying whatever. These are real people that I'm dealing with that I may meet one day, and I don't want to be steering folks wrong. You have to have some sense of responsibility, and accountability helps you with that. You know what I'm saying? You're not just out there lone ranger trying to just like you versus the internet. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not a healthy way to approach it. But my bad, Damon. I know I cut you off.
No, it's okay. I was looking at some of the comments. Go ahead.
I was going to say this too, that I know the True Summit is powerful because I got saved at the True Summit this year. I was still at my church when I got back home. So thanks, guys.
Right.
All right, Damon.
So
let's bring in that doctrinal conversation.
All right. So we've talked about developing a doctrinal statement, and we've got 10 things on the on this list that we want to really put some skin to. We've got a skeleton right now, but some of the things that we want to we want to have agreement on. We're not going to have agreement on every theological idea, but when we talk about Bible doctrine, especially essentials, there needs to be 100% agreement around the essentials of the Christian faith. So one of the things is that we need to have agreement on the Trinity. I've suspected that there are those that are among us that operate in apologetic spaces that don't even believe in the Trinity. Some of them, whether they believe that Jesus is actually God, is a little shaky. And so, again, what we're trying to do is ensure that the movement is able to survive, that it's a credible movement, and that it is made up. It's a growing movement of people that are solid in what the Christian faith is all about. They're not shaky on that. So we don't need people that don't believe in the Trinity. The Trinity is not only part of our biblical faith, but when we look through church history, we can see that the church has always affirmed the doctrine of the Trinity. There's no reason for anybody to believe that this is some optional way of thinking about God. And yet my suspicions are that there are those who are operating in urban apologetic spaces that's not really taking the doctrine of the Trinity as an essential matter of the Christian faith. So that's one of them.
Well, let me say to that too, man. And I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation. I promise you, I'm not. But I just want to kind of just make it plain a little bit. I think what you have, just from my observation, I think that, just speaking plainly, you have people who can't make a healthy distinction between orthodoxy and what they believe to be white supremacy. Right. Then you have a lot of people who assume that because a particular view is orthodox within Christianity, that somehow, the Europeans pass it along to us and it's up for debate and maybe we can, throw it away and so forth. And the Trinity would be one of the examples of that. You know what I'm saying? Right. Some people believe that the Trinitarian doctrine is some type of Roman or European invention. I mean, I'm talking about Christians, right? Yeah. People that I have dialogue with, okay? And, we don't need that. I mean, the fact of the matter is, starting from the scriptures, working our way through church history, we see the Trinity clearly, entrenched in what it is that Christianity affirms, and there's just no way around that. There's no way around that. It's not a white man thing. It's a biblical thing. And so we have to be careful, and we'll get to this later in terms of the issue of race, but with all of these doctrines, I think that's a constant theme that people have to do their homework as to where these theological viewpoints come from and understand, what orthodoxy actually includes, and not just chalk something up that they're familiar with, or that they've taken for granted as, some type of white supremacist injection into Christianity.
And I think it's also important that we define our terms, because there are those running around that would say, I believe in the Trinity in the Eastern sense. I actually heard a false teacher say, oh, I believe in the Trinity in the Eastern sense. He didn't go on to define what that means, but it obviously isn't what we mean when we use the word Trinity. So let's briefly kind of define what the Trinity is before we move, because there are cats out there that will say, I believe in the Trinity. However, I believe in the Trinity in the Eastern sense. And I don't 100% know what they mean by that, but I know it's not what we mean by that.
Well, and that's exactly why this doctrinal statement is going to put in very clear and no uncertain terms exactly what the doctrine of the Trinity actually means. There'll be scripture that will be used, and this doctrinal statement will ensure that there is no ambiguity in the language, so as to just get away with simply saying, I believe in one God. Well, that's already established. We all believe in one God. But monotheism, we've talked about this before. There are all kinds of monotheisms. But we want to know whether or not you affirm biblical monotheism. And so the Bible has revealed to us what monotheism looks like as a result of Jesus's incarnation, and that is biblical Trinitarianism. Trinitarianism affirms the oneness of God, but it also affirms the full revelation of God in its completeness, and so it is very important. You see, when you're saying I'm doing apologetics, 1 Peter 3:15, be ready to give an answer, an apologia. Well, if you're shaky on what you believe, you're not ready to give that answer. Anybody that's engaging in apologetics needs to be firm in what they faith, in what they believe. You cannot help somebody to understand the what's and the whys of what it is that Christianity believes, or what it is that the Bible teaches, if you are uncertain, or if you are agnostic about certain areas of the essential Christian faith. And so when we say essentials, we're talking about things that characterize what Christians ought to believe, what they should believe, what is absolutely essential to being a Christian. And one of those things is the doctrine of the Trinity. There's no option in that. You cannot have a belief in another God. It is not open to how you interpret God. The first two commandments, have no other gods before me, and not to worship any other gods, or make any graven image. Whenever you have an idea about God that is not biblical, you're already in violation of the first and the second commandment, because that graven image conceptually in your mind is not the conceptual, it is not the God of biblical conception. So you're worshiping a God of another image in your mind that you have set up, and you're putting another God, that particular God, before the one true God. So it is not optional to believe as you would like about who God is and what He is like. And so the doctrine of the Trinity is definitely one of those. We talked about, and I'll just name some of them: the doctrine of the church, the doctrine of salvation, the doctrine of man, not only dealing with sin, but also race, the Imago Dei, the deity of Christ.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah,
Damon,
go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some after you too, but yeah.
Yeah. So those of you that are listening, I want you to understand that right now on this broadcast, we have two people that are either reformed or reform leaning, be Damon and I. We have two people that wouldn't necessarily place themselves in the reform camp, Jay and Adam. Okay. So as we talk about these doctrinal perspectives, understand that, we're not drafting a statement to secretly get you to agree to Calvinism. Okay.
Right.
It's not a statement that pushes one soteriological perspective or one soteriological systematic. It truly is a doctrinal statement that all of us should be able to get under. Okay. Mm-hmm. All of us should be able to affirm, agree on, and go forward with. So I just wanted to point that out, right? That we, on this broadcast right now, we have different soteriological, views as it pertains to monergism and synergism. However, we've come together
That's right.
to talk about these doctrinal perspectives and to draft this statement. And that is important. All right, go ahead.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. I just wanted to add in too, because you mentioned race, and we saw some months ago, obviously when the whole James White thing went down, there was a lot of beef behind that. And I just want to say that somebody doesn't like disagreements over like one's political persuasion or one's approach to how they navigate racial issues in America or whatever context. Like those kinds of things certainly, shouldn't cause fractures to the point where people are out of fellowship with one another. You know what I'm saying? If at all possible. I guess what I mean by that, I'm gonna just be straight up. I think that given the nature of what it is that we do, right, we're looking to bring people into the faith who probably have views about race, or at least many of them have views about race that are not biblical, obviously. You know what I'm saying? Right. And so the questions are, I view the urban apologetics community as being like a triage center as you enter into the body of Christ. You know what I'm saying? In terms of how to navigate the racial concerns. So, people want to know, like, how can I uphold the right moral stance, against injustice and things of that nature? Or, do I have to be a coon to be a Christian? You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
That mean that I have to become Carlton Banks and I can never speak against racial injustice and so on and so forth. And then, you have people who, I guess maybe on the end of the spectrum where if you're not as militant as I am, then I can't rock with you. Or if you're not as non-militant as I am, then I can't rock with you. And just stuff like that can be very disruptive. And we have to be careful not to allow people's, because people have various different perspectives on how they feel they want to navigate this race stuff. You know what I'm saying? And we have to allow space for that. There's nothing wrong with confronting people if you feel somebody is out of step with what the gospel would require of us in terms of justice and really shining the light of just God's holiness in whatever context that we're in. There's nothing wrong with confronting people. But at the same time, we've got to be careful not to take our own political leanings or dispositions, and make them some sort of requirement for somebody else. You see what I'm saying? We got to think critically about these things. And again, talk with people. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just way too much, it's too many cats is blasting each other. And the fact of the matter is, just like the scriptures say, if you have an art with your brother, go to him. That's the first step. Whether you're online or in person, that still should be, the first step. And I just see too many people, overstepping that. But I kind of going past my point, but maybe we'll come back to that later.
Oh yeah. So, and that's good. I'm glad you guys are jumping in because we want to obviously create some discussion around many of these points. So, of course, the deity of Christ is another important piece. You've got some people who have converted from some of the Hebrew Israelite cults, Cometicism, so forth and so on. and sometimes some of those people still have a little bit of the
residue,
the residue on them, and it's important we get what they don't believe anymore, but it's important that we know for a fact that what they believe about Christ aligns with the scripture. So the deity of Christ is a non-negotiable. It is an essential. You've got to believe that Jesus Christ, who he is as a person, is both God and man. It's what it's the hypostatic union, and understanding that he is not part God, part man, but that he is fully God, fully man, that it was he, the second person of the Trinity, the eternal Son of God, that incarnated, literally became part of the human race. So the deity of Christ is very, very important for anybody that is doing apologetics on any level, to be absolutely clear about what it is that you believe with regards to the person and obviously the work of Jesus. And I would say along with that, definitely the virgin birth. What do you guys think about that? For me, that is an essential matter of the Christian faith.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, the apostles taught it, so I think that's is one of those things that I don't see how we can get past it, and I want to reiterate something that Isaiah said, that, whether you're Calvinist, Armenian, whatever, I mean, if you can't affirm the deity of Christ, that's not a Calvinist issue. Like, neither Calvinists nor Armenians or whoever have cornered the market on affirming the deity of Christ or the virgin birth. Like, these are things that should be neutral ground. And but as to your point about the virgin birth, obviously, I would say that the apostles taught it, and I don't see any good reason to not hold people to that.
Yep. Christ must be born of a virgin, because if he has any of Joseph's blood in him,
we all screwed.
We have a problem.
Well, just look in the just for instance, just in the comment section. Anytime any of us do a video, the comment section is explosive. But when you look in the comment section, you'll notice that there is a bunch of divergent points on theology and doctrine going on in the comment section. You've got people in the comment section right now. Now, here's the interesting thing. You got a lot of people calling themselves Christians, right? But you got people in the comment section that don't even believe in the Trinity, and yet say that they, right. You've got people in the comment section who will say that, well, it is important, but it is not a matter of essentiality. And well, I think the Bible has already answered that question. Whoever denies the Father and the Son, the Bible says is not of God. In fact, it even goes on to say that you have the spirit of the Antichrist. And so what does it mean to deny the Father and the Son? That means to deny the personal distinction between he who is the Son and he who is the Father. So if you don't believe in the Trinity, you are, by very nature of that, denying the Father and the Son. It's not possible for you to not deny the Father and the Son, and then deny the Trinity, because when you are talking about the Trinity, we are talking about one God, three separate and distinct persons. And so the reality is, if the Father and the Son are one person for you, you've denied the Father and the Son, because you are denying the distinction in their person. That is absolutely essential. Now, there are people who are ignorant. That's one thing. But we're talking about people who intentionally and willfully deny the revelation of God in Scripture. It is not optional. There's some people who are just ignorant. They don't know how to articulate particular matters of the faith. We're not talking about those people. In fact, those kind of people shouldn't be doing apologetics anyway. You got to sit around somewhere long enough to get discipled. But we're talking about people who should know better. Nobody has any business teaching somebody if you are not sound in the Christian faith. You have no business sharing your faith, correcting somebody's theology, correcting anybody's doctrine, or even trying to do apologetics if you're not sound in these areas. I mean, it should be a given. We shouldn't even have to put together a doctrinal statement, but because we are seeing so much theological and doctrinal variation, it has become necessary that we say, okay, hey, listen, here are the essentials of the faith. We need you to sign. If you're going to be doing apologetics, we need to come into absolute agreement biblically and doctrinally on what it is that we believe 100%. So.
Yeah, I kind of, I know it's random. It kind of makes me think about this song from a Little Brother. I can't remember. I think it's called Dreams. At the end of one verse, the dude says, "Do you really want to win or just look good losing?" You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I think that's as far as the urban apologetics community, I don't want to look good losing, man. You know what I'm saying? Like people, it's just that simple. I can't be like I'm believing. I'm really praying that God puts us in spaces to where the conscious community has no choice but to see the cross front and center in their midst, be convicted of their sins, and turn to Him. That's what I'm believing God for.
Absolutely.
And we can't be out here, as ambassadors for Christ, arm in arm, and then we got to look over our shoulder because we don't know, you know what I'm saying, like who's riding with us. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't know. You see what I'm saying? Like we don't know if we're all on the same page. We can't have that. We can't have this kind of division as we go forth with the gospel. I'm saying the Bible talks about know those that labor amongst you. Exactly. That's a biblical principle. That's a biblical principle. People hit me up to come on the show all the time. I don't let everybody come on the show because I don't know you, fam. You know what I'm saying? If I don't have some kind of sense that you're gonna, that you're representing the gospel, appropriately, then there's no way that we can't. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? We got a job to do. That's what this is about. We got a job to do. And we have to understand who's riding with us. By us, I mean folks, who have been called to minister, within this context.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, the Apostle John, in 2 John and in 3 John, he addresses the elect lady in 2 John. He says he loves her in truth, right? And he says the same thing about Gaius in 3 John, that he loves him in truth. So not only does he love the elect lady and Gaius, earnestly and sincerely, but he also emphasizes that they share this common truth, right? And Absolutely. if we're not united around the truth, right? If I can't go to war with you if we don't have the same God and gospel that we're fighting for. And so a lot of cats, they forget that when they get saved, they are saved into an ancient community. That's right. So not only are they out of the loop biblically, but when they don't affirm, the Trinity, and when they don't affirm the deity of Christ, well, they're standing against,
that's right,
issues that have been settled for centuries. You know what I mean? They're coming along basically saying, I know better, and they're basically, wiping their feet on the Christian witness over the centuries about what the scriptures have to say. And
Absolutely.
So,
it's good, man.
Yeah, that you make a really good point there. It's arrogant, it's self-righteous. To come in and say, I'm going to rehash and repackage ancient heresies as though it's optional. As a Christian, I can make it up as I go. And so listen, the very same thing that we're talking about, this is what churches ought to also be doing as well. You've got to have safeguards around the local church community. Otherwise, you leave all doors open and all kinds of people are going to come in with all kinds of ideas. And the next thing you know, you've got a universalistic and a pluralistic kind of congregation with postmodern thoughts about truth, as though truth is it's not absolute. It's relative, in other words. And so that's what has happened to a whole lot of congregations that have not really put in place these doctrinal safeguards. Their congregations now are theologically liberal, and so it is again with the deity of Jesus, and again the Trinity, and the doctrine of salvation, the gospel, the resurrection of Jesus. Let's say we're having a conversation tonight, and the discussion was about the Bible, and let's just say we all pretty much assumed that every one of us here believe that the Bible is inspired, that it is inerrant, that it is infallible, and that it is the highest court of authority and arbitration on all matters of faith and practice. Let's say I just assumed that Adam Coleman believes that Isaiah Robertson believes that Jay believes that. And we get into this discussion, and lo and behold, Isaiah is like, well, I don't really believe that the Bible's inspired. I definitely, though, believe that it is a good book. I believe that it does have some authority from antiquity, but it's not inspired by God. Well, that's going to derail our conversation, because as Christians, we ought to be united around the fact that the Bible is God's inspired word. And yet there are those in this community of apologetics that don't believe that the Bible is inspired, or some of them believe in more than just the biblical canon. You've got some who believe in some of these apocryphal and pseudepigraphal books. And so again, there is this need to put a doctrinal statement in place, because you've got folks that are just, it's almost like a free-for-all. It's like WWE. What do they call that? A Royal Rumble or a Battle Royal. You've got folks doing their own thing, everybody fighting each other. And so we've got to really put some safeguards in place doctrinally in order to ensure that people are not rogue doctrinally and theologically, biblically, so to speak, that they're not believing things that are not becoming of what it means to be a Christian. So, what are your thoughts on that, Isaiah?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on board 100%. And I know that there's some out there listening, and for some reason you're bristling at the thought of having to sign off on a statement, and the question is why? Like, if you're out there right now listening to us and you're mad about what we're talking about, then you might be part of the problem that we're trying to address right now. We should rejoice in the fact that right. What is unity, right? What is unity? Does it mean that we all look the same, dress the same, think the same? Absolutely not. That's uniformity. And a telltale sign of a cult is uniformity. Everybody thinking the same, looking the same. But unity is, even though we have diverse backgrounds, even though we have different ethnicities, right? We can all come underneath the umbrella of the same God, the same gospel, the essentials of the faith. That's what unites us, right? So there should be a hallelujah, because when Jesus prayed in John 17, his high priestly prayer, his prayer was for all of us to be one, even as he is one with his Father. And so this is a moment to applaud and say, yes, this is good for the urban apologetic movement. So if you're out there listening and this is aggravating you or frustrating you that this is happening, then you might be part of the problem, bro. Just be straight up.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, any relationship, whether it be marital, friendship, family, whatever, you got to be intentional if you expect it to be a strong one, right? And I think that's what this is all about. I mean, it's just like, I got a sister, you know what I'm saying? And when I was growing up, if some knucklehead boy come to the door, I'm not just going to let him in. I'm going to size him up. right? You know what I'm saying? That's just the nature. That's as a brother, that's what you do. I'm saying I was intentional about protecting my sister in that way. And I think that we have to be the same way when it comes to this urban apologetics community. We can't just let people just ride up in here, you know, claiming this or claiming that, and, you know, not really being about it for real. You say, we just can't do that. We can't do that. Right. So I think you know, to your point, Isaiah Robertson, I think the idea of authority, you know, it's some sort of standard for whatever reason. Sometimes it rubs people the wrong way because they feel like folks are trying to control them. And, you know, the nature of the community that I think we deal with, I think there's that element of anti-establishment, you know, that kind of falls into play, you know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, this is not about people trying to control the urban apologetics community or puffing ourselves up as if we're whatever. What this is individuals who, again, like I said before, care about the urban apologetics community. And in my position, you know, I spend, I mean, maybe it sounds crazy, but I spend a lot of time on different threads. You know, anything that I find related to urban apologetics, I'm constantly watching. I'm saying, because partly for the show, I want to provide the community with something that's going to be beneficial. And from doing that, I can have a perspective as to what's going on. And when I don't like what I see, I feel like I have to say something. You know what I'm saying? And right now, I don't like all that I'm seeing. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, we've got to do better at being brothers and sisters, obviously. You know what I'm saying? And we have to be intentional about that. And I think one of the ways of doing that is establishing a baseline. You know what I'm saying? All organizations do that. You know, you have to have a baseline of what you're about, you know, a mission statement or something. There has to be a baseline. And I think what this is about is just we're not trying to recreate the wheel. This is just instituting a reminder of what it is that we ought to be about anyway as Christians. That's what this is about. Right.
Yeah. So just there's some interesting comments that are going on, and a lot of solid agreement. And I tell you, I think that most people are in agreement that there needs to be consensus in the urban apologetics community. I just kind of getting a feel for what we're hearing in the comment section. And I think most people are seeing the same thing that we're seeing. There's a lot of unnecessary fighting. Again, intramural debate is to be expected. The earliest Christians did that. But what you don't find is division over essentials. You don't divide, you unite over the essentials. You don't divide over those. And so it is not cool to take to Facebook and call a sister in the faith or a brother in the faith a false teacher when that brother or sister in the faith holds to all of the essentials of the Christian faith. If your disagreement is secondary or tertiary, that person has not denied the faith in any way. And yet we are seeing in this community that kind of language being used and thrown around. And so if we don't do this, then what the community is going to, the kind of reputation that the urban apologetics community is going to get is going to be one of, it's going to come across as very immature, biblically and theologically immature, because of the way that those associated with it behaves. And so we want to make sure that people who are wanting to do apologetics are doing it effectively. And when you are disagreeing with brothers and sisters in Christ, that you're doing it with gentleness and with respect according to the scripture. And you're not, again, taking to Facebook, calling people false teachers and heretics who have not denied any essential matter of the Christian faith. And make no mistake about it, there are false teachers out there. There are heretics out there. But the reason that we can be so certain about that is not because we are using our own judgment, but we are using the touchstone of scripture, and we've got the witness, the faithful witness of church history to be able to look at it and say, this is what the word says about it, and this is the way the church has always reacted to these kinds of doctrines and beliefs. And so we're seeing, so we definitely have got to get more consensus doctrinally in this community. So,
and I was going to say too, don't think, like I said, I spent a lot of time, monitoring this growing urban apologetics community. Don't think that these ex-pastors and pseudo scholars are not becoming aware of what it is that we're doing. I'm saying, I know for a fact that some of these ex-pastors, under whether it be under their own alias or whatever, are in some of these forums, I'm saying, that, where urban apologists congregate. I know that for a fact. I'm saying, and they're taking note of how we interact with each other. I'm saying, the arguments that we're preparing on, I know it for a fact. I'm saying? So we can't just be willy-nilly in terms of how we deal with each other. I'm saying, like, we're exposed, and we can't just be out here acting any kind of way. You know what I'm saying? The flip side about it is too, just as a rule of thumb, I just get 2 rules of thumb, right? People wonder sometimes why I don't post certain things that they may tag me in. I never post something that I can't defend. Because if you post a 2-hour video and I don't if I haven't actually watched it all the way through, or I know enough about your ministry to where I can co-sign it, I don't repost it. You know what I'm saying? And that's number 1. I don't speak on things that I don't know. Number 2, if I can't defend it, I don't post it myself. And then number 3, when it comes to, the claim of being a heretic, of calling somebody a heretic, unless you really chewed on both the scriptures and have an understanding around that particular issue in terms of church history, you have to be careful about calling people heretics. Unless you've done the prerequisite homework in that particular area that you believe somebody's making an erroneous claim, don't just throw that word heretic around. You know what I'm saying? It's just not a good look. You know what I'm saying? It makes you look silly. You know what I'm saying? What you have to do, if you're going to throw that word out, make sure that you've done your homework in whatever particular area. You know what I'm saying? Now, that being said, I'm not addressing that to any particular person. I'm just saying that's just my rule of thumb. That's how I approach it. You know what I'm saying? And I think that it's a good way to handle it. But with that being said, I think that there's a need for protocol. I'm saying one of the things that I think we don't need is open-ended back and forth debates that are just endless. You know what I'm saying? It's just not helpful. You know what I'm saying? I think, and this is one of the things that I'm going to propose, because in addition to doctrines, I think we should propose just general protocol about how we handle conflict within our community, kind of some rules of thumb. And I think one of those things should be, if you really feel that you have something that you want to debate about with a brother or sister or what have you, have the debate. I'm saying you come prepared, they come prepared, say what you got to say, and then let that be it. You know what I'm saying? Don't let it be 50 different videos going back and forth, because inevitably it gets messy, it gets out of hand. People start saying things disrespectful to each other, and it's just not a good look. Let's be organized about it. It's not to say, I'm not expecting people to just sign some statement and then be friends or just in complete agreement on every single point the next day. We understand that. I understand that there are people who feel that some doctrinal issues are so important that we just really need to get it right, and they feel the need to contend with their brother over that thing. I get that. That's fine. Let's just have some order about how we do it. Let's just not let it be an open-ended, never-ending, conflict that spirals out of control. Let's put some parameters around it, and I think then a conflict that can be beneficial, and be a learning experience for people doesn't turn into a forest fire.
Absolutely.
We don't need.
Absolutely. Yeah. You make a really good point. A lot of, I'll say this, there are times that, in some of my presentations that I'm coming across, maybe with a really sharp edge, and, I don't want anybody to get the idea, that, my passionate presentation means that I'm angry at anybody, or that I'm trying to be divisive within the body of Christ. I have tried to be as clear as I can, that my goal in doing apologetics is to equip believers, to edify believers, to encourage believers in the faith, and to prevent and to even protect believers from invading doctrines and so forth and so on. Sometimes, though, that means having some hard discussions about doctrines that are within the church itself. And because they are Christians who hold to some of those doctrines, they start taking offense. But in saying all of that, what I don't want people to learn from the apologetics community is that they should take to their own walls and then kind of replicate a almost a negative kind of behavior that they think is characteristic of the apologetics community. And so inadvertently, I think I may have contributed to some of there's almost a nastiness in terms of the way that sometimes people are coming across with each other. And I want to make sure that, that I am not contributing to that kind of tension, that kind of negative disposition or anything like that. Sometimes it's a matter of the way that we communicate, but inadvertently, sometimes the wrong idea is communicated, and people think that being this whole idea of keeping it real, and so I don't want people to get the wrong idea about what it means to do apologetics and think that because they see somebody coming across a certain way that they should replicate that, and then what you're really doing is you're just kind of perpetuating almost a snide and a snarky, a negative attitude. And what we don't need is we don't need to perpetuate that kind of snarkiness in doing apologetics. There's no need to be disrespectful with people that you're talking to or whatever. And so I think that is something that needs to be discussed as well, that we want to encourage that part of 1 Peter 3:15 with gentleness and with respect. And I think that's a part of apologetics that doesn't get emphasized as much as it needs to, but it is just as important as being ready to give an answer to every man. So, I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's good, man.
And for everybody listening, this is why this is so wonderful. Here's how it would sort of play out practically. Somebody's live on Facebook and they're waxing eloquent about some particular topic. You can listen to them, and after 5 minutes, you can simply type in the comment section, "Hey, did you sign the such and such document?" If they say yes, well, then that they affirm the essentials of the faith. If they say no, that's an opportunity to say, why not? Right? Because I believe in subordinationism, or I believe in, what I mean? You begin to see that they hold some type of heterodox or aberrant view that would then place them outside of the faith. Because again, the essentials articulate what Christians must believe, right? You have the essentials and the non-essentials. If you deny one of the essentials, well, you're none of his, right? And so if you have somebody, that's talking good about a particular subject, yet you ask them if they got a chance to sign the document and they say no, you're able to press them. So it allows us to vet people a little bit more. It allows us to know whether or not, this person talking about, the Maccabees, or this person talking about, somebody could be really good on the transmission and the translation of scripture, and then you find out, that they're, that they're heterodox in another area. This is what this document will do, and it's huge, because then, right, we're able to say that, look, just because you have the title urban apologist on your broadcast, we don't affirm this cat. He doesn't represent us, right? He's not under our umbrella. He's not in our camp, and it's crucial and it's needed, because right now, like I said earlier, it's the wild, wild west out there, And, there are cats in the comments section right now, that affirm baptismal regeneration, Sabellianism, and they could get off of this broadcast and, right after we're done, go live and have urban apologists on their, on their broadcast as they are affirming Sabellianism and baptismal regeneration. And, and they'll have, potentially, several ears listening in, thinking that this guy believes the same thing that this guy does, and this guy represents the faith in the same way that guy represents the faith. And that's just, that's Satan is a deceiver. Right. And so you can co-opt a title, all right, and draw people away from the true and living Christ underneath a title or a banner. He'll absolutely do that. And so, we want to.
Well, I'll tell you what I like about what you said too is I think, and this is what came to me. I hadn't thought about it this way before, but tell me what y'all think about. Like, one thing that we've discussed is, like, right now you don't have a formal, group, what I'm saying, that's like the benchmark for urban apologetics. I'm saying there's no crew that has really stepped into that space, right? Who could really set the tone, or some type of leadership, right? It's not like an organization where you have, specific appointed leaders. It's not that sort of a thing. It's more of a nebulous kind of community that's forming. With that being said, there really isn't an opportunity for there to be like a top-down, establishing of protocol and a standard. And so we have to do it on a community level. We have to do it on a community level, right? If somebody, this is not something where, again, like I said, it's like a top-down deal where notable people online are given, the Urban Apologetics community marching orders. This is a community-based standard setting. I guess I could put it that way. And so, for example, myself, people know I've got the show. I specifically remember when I was doing the series on Carlton Pearson, getting into the doctrine of hell. I knew I was going to have to touch on, matters of salvation and so forth. This may sound kind of corny, but at certain points while I'm preparing, what I'm going to say, I think, okay, would Isaiah Robertson say about that? Would Damon Richardson say about that? There's this accountability factor, right? Where I want to take those things into account so it prevents me from going off the rails. See, that's actually helpful. Like when you push back and when we set a community standard like that, it's actually helpful for people who are trying to get out here to do urban apologetics, because it actually keeps you from going off the rails. You see what I'm saying? And so, to Isaiah's point, perfect example, if somebody's got a video, you could hit them up and be like, hey man, have you signed the, such and such, document, whatever it comes to be called. You know what I'm saying? This should be a community-wide establishing of a standard. And I think that, that's the only way that it can happen, given that we don't have a structure that, by which it could come some other way.
Right. Absolutely.
And I'm just going to say this briefly, Damon, and then you go forward. But we have two generals. So I'm an apologist, but I'm a husband, and before I'm actually an apologist, I'm a local church pastor. So that's what takes the majority of my time. That's why you guys don't see me engaging in a lot of debates, and because I have a small flock of people that God has blessed me to oversee spiritually, and so that's where most of my energies go toward. But what you're saying is, if you wanted to, you just become wreck shop on everybody. That's what you really say. No. I'm letting y'all have it, but for real. No, definitely not. No, what I'm saying is, if we're talking about generals, right, representatives of this urban apologetics movement, cats that we should consider as generals in this movement, well, we've got two of them on the night in Adam Coleman and Damon Richardson. And I'm hoping that generals like Eric Mason and Jerome Gay and Muhammad Tanzimore and these other cats that are out there will hear this broadcast, and they'll affirm it and co-sign it and say, yes, thumbs up, this is great for the community. Because to your point, Adam, although this movement has a lot of disparate parts, and And we're not trying to create, as somebody suggested in the comments, we're not creating a denomination or anything like that. However, it's good to have seasoned, knowledgeable, local church connected, authoritative voices that can steer this movement. And that's what a Damon Richardson and an Adam Coleman, that's what they are. And if we can get Mace and Gay and everybody else in on this, I don't think they knew that we were going live and we were going to discuss this, but I'm sure I'm sure they'll hear this and my prayer is that they'll be like, yes, great. This is something that's needed for the movement and get on board and support as I'm.
And I can say a lot of them do support. I mean, I have to say, I've already spoken to a lot of the guys that you named, most of them that you named. You know what I'm saying? They kind of throwing it out there, and they do. They would be favorable to this kind of an effort. You know what I'm saying? And other guys like Vocab Malone. We had a conversation about this the other day. I've been in contact with brothers like Brother Jay, K-Dub, Faithful to God. I haven't hit up everybody, but pretty much anybody that's on my contact, I'm kind of working my way through. Yeah. And I think generally speaking, folks who are out here doing it, really appreciate the idea and would be willing to move forward with something like that. Obviously, this is a conversation we're just throwing out right now. We need to have, I think more discussion with some of these other folks so they can participate in it. But, I threw my email out earlier where people can hit me up if they have any ideas. But I do think that this is an idea that while it's new, I think it'll have some good traction at the outset. I believe it will.
Right. Good. Yeah, I believe so. And there are a lot of people that
shout out to Brother Brian. Spoke to him about it as well.
Yeah, Ernest Grant, and there's a lot of people. Vince Bantu and there's so many people. You've got, of course, Jude 3, Lisa Fields, and so many people who are doing apologetics. Contextual apologetics is really what urban apologetics is. It's not. It's not a kind of apologetics that's either evidential, presuppositional, cumulative case. True. It's really an apologetics that's aimed at a particular context in terms of where you do the apologetics. And so that's not even just for Black people. It's for urban people in particular. A lot of our apologetics, however, is aimed at Blacks, aimed, I should say, at Black people. But I think it's important to distinguish the fact that Black people are not all monolithic, and they all don't live in urban communities either. Right. And so the reality is that what does apologetics look like when we are aiming it, directing it at Black people? Some of those issues may not necessarily be about the mystery cults or whatever. Some of those issues are going to be whatever regular, normal apologetics issues are, arguments for God, whether it's the cosmological argument or whatever, arguments about evil, and so forth and so on. And so one of my concerns in doing apologetics and doing it contextually is that I've always had this concern about kind of getting boxed in. And this idea that Black Christians have no interest in other issues of theological concern or what have you. And so I really didn't want to see this movement get typecasted with only really talking about Black Hebrew Israelites or only really talking about.
That's a great point, man.
Yeah, because we're Christians, and so just because we're Black doesn't mean that we care anything less about the arguments of creation or whether or not we care about the resurrection, the historical evidence for the resurrection of Christ. We care about those things too, and so I think that is one thing that we would need to address as a community to make sure that that we're doing apologetics as a whole. So doing urban apologetics doesn't mean that we're only talking about a few things. It means that we're doing all apologetics, but we're aiming it contextually. So we're not only talking about one or two issues. So that's been one of my concerns as well. And that's why I think kind of putting some structure to this community of people who identify with apologetics, that we bring all these kinds of things up. So, I think this is a real healthy discussion.
That's such a great point, man. It's a difficult balance because, and this is something that you and I have talked about, but I think that in terms of what people are aware of, in terms of what the needs are, it falls somewhat short as to the broad range of topics and things that need to be addressed. You know what I'm saying? The fact of the matter is, we can't all be doing stuff on Hebrew Israelites. I'm saying, you can't all be, doing Comedics. We can't all be doing the Moors. We need to have, and my prayer is, as more and more people get into the urban apologetics community and are active in putting out content, then it will allow each of us to not have to be like a generalist where we feel like we got to do everything. Focus in on the things that God has given us. People who listen to the show, they probably noticed that, early on, I did spend a little more time there was a period where I spent a lot of time just kind of on a Black history tip because that was necessary, but, I'm injecting more philosophy, dealing with the problem of evil, dealing with, we got brothers coming up soon. They're going to be really touching on a variety of different things. And I said that to say, one thing I don't want to see is the urban apologetics community get stagnant. Okay. I don't want to see them get stagnant because, I don't know if I want to say this or not, but I predict that there are going to be specific changes in the conscious community, given the way things are going now, that if we get stagnant, we won't be able to stay a step ahead. I'll just say that. So what we need to be doing is just constantly growing, and pursuing just wherever God leads you, just whatever areas of expertise or interest He leads you into in terms of arguing for the faith. Pursue that. And don't feel like you have to be pigeonholed into, a particular group. And there's nothing wrong if you do specialize in Hebrews. There's nothing wrong with it. We need that. I'm just saying that we need that and other stuff. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
We don't want to be like the Steve Urkel of apologetics. Steve Urkel got typecast in that one role. You know what I'm saying? And I'm be honest with you. I'm not sure if I just say this or not, but I'm gonna just be straight up with you. Some stuff that I write or some stuff that I talk about on the Tru-ID podcast, I know people are not going to care about it. I speak on it specifically because there's no voice from an African-American perspective in that area. And I think that we need that. That in of itself is a witness as to, I'll just leave it as that. I don't want to go further than that. But I think we don't want to be typecast. And sometimes we need to touch on things outside of realms where we feel comfortable.
You made a good point in a discussion we had some time ago about your work in the area of atheism in Black communities. And that was something that historically Black people in America have always been noted for their faith. And for the most part, it's almost an assumption. You go spend the night over with one of your relatives on the weekend, it's going to be some going to church on Sunday. Well, at least that's the way it used to be.
Right.
Bring your church clothes.
There you go.
Bring your church clothes because Black folks are going to church, and so now we're in a time where if you felt like you knew what all Black people were like, well, that landscape is changing, and so things that were not typical of Black people or even brown people. Well, they're committing suicide at very, very high rates now.
True.
And there was a time when the profile of serial killers, it was pretty much always white. Well, that's not always true now. Some of those serial killers, and so apologetics is really necessary because it arms the church with the ability to be able to address not only theological issues, but social issues and moral issues, and to be able to speak to those things from a biblical perspective. And the reality is that atheism among Black people is growing. There are a number of Blacks who are attracted to non-spirituality as an option because they are simply tired of the option has pretty much always been, mostly for the most part, Christian, whether you're going to be Baptist or Pentecostal. And then after a while, it's, are you going to be Christian or Muslim? And then after a while, are you going to be Muslim Christian or Hebrew Israelite or whatever? But there are other blacks who are saying, well, I want to turn to spirituality. I want to reclaim the faith of the ancestors, and they're attracted to African traditional religion, African spirituality. And then there are blacks who are saying, I don't want spirituality at all. I don't believe in God. And so that is why we cannot be pigeonholed in doing urban apologetics to only dealing with a number of issues. After a while, how many times are we going to answer the question, is Christianity the black man's religion? If by now, if folks don't know the answer to that, they just need to catch up.
Right. We done killed that one already. I mean, that's over with, you know.
Exactly.
On other things, and I think you're right. You know, atheism is not the white man's, you know, religion or worldview. You know, we have to be careful about thinking that way. You know, as you said, it is growing. It's still, you know, relatively unpopular, somewhat taboo, but it's I'm seeing a different vibe from black atheists now, where they kind of tout each other as like kind of the martyrish, you know, type of minority in the black community. And that sentiment is causing it, I think, to grow in a lot of ways. And we have to be prepared to deal with that. You know what I'm saying? But you know, to your point, going back again, you know, we've got to have each other's back, and we can't have each other's back if we don't know where each other's at. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, we gotta be unified at the outset, as this thing is really coming to fruition, so that, you know, as the opportunities increase to address these issues that are out there in the world, you know, we've got a solid foundation. And I don't care what sport you play,
right?
You know, having a solid foundation is always important. I don't care if you're a quarterback. I don't care if you're going for a rebound in basketball, playing tennis. You know, having a solid foundation, you know, is always important. You know what I'm saying? In any sport. And I think it's the same way when it comes to apologetics. We need to have a solid foundation.
Absolutely.
So as we are moving and doing what we got to do, we don't find ourselves stumbling over.
There's some people. Well, Isaiah, I wanted to throw a question at you from the comment section. There are people who are, you know, asking some questions, and some people are wondering, well, why is there an urban apologetics? Why not just call it apologetics? What, you know, why are we trying to be that specific? You know, what would you say to that? How do you address that kind of a question?
There is urban apologetics because there is evangelicalism, white evangelicalism, which makes urban apologetics a necessity, because we have been trained to believe that Africans had no influence upon the Reformation. We have been trained to believe that, you know, the black church is full of theologically ignorant, backwards thinking. We have been trained to think that, you know, white is right. And that's why, you know, in most of the major seminaries, mainline and otherwise, the textbooks are full of, you know, white theologians. You learn about Tillage, you learn about Bart, but you don't. The only black theologian you learn about is James Cone. So this movement was born out of necessity, right? Because black people started to ask questions, and within our community, you know, to Damon's point, what was once sort of a given, right? We're going to church. We're gonna, you know, and when we walk in the church, there's a picture of white Jesus on the wall. We don't really question it much. You know what I mean? You know, now there's a whole new generation of black people that they have questions, and the seminaries aren't answering their questions. Let me give you an example. I took church history at RTS, and we're talking about church history from the Protestant Reformation on. So this was church history too, and a great professor. None against my professor. He was teaching what he knew and what he was taught. But you know, we were talking about the Reformation, and I asked him a question. I said, what influence did the African continent have upon, the Reformation? Was there anything going on? Was anything happening? Like, you're telling me about, Philip Melanchthon, and you're telling me about, Beza, and you're telling me about Bullinger, and you're telling me about all these guys, but, was there any Brown influence? And he stopped for a second. He thought, and he said, you know what? I don't know. I don't think so. He said, I think this is just a period where God really sovereignly moved and worked through Germans and Europeans and people from Scotland and stuff like that. And that was his response. And this was before, we discovered Luther's conversation with Michael the Deacon and his fascination with the Ethiopian church.
You're right. That's wild.
So I'm sitting in my church history 2 class, like, okay, well, I guess he's right. I guess we didn't really play a role in the Reformation.
Right.
And so, the urban apologetics movement has been born out of necessity.
Absolutely.
Because, we're very present, and I would even say prevalent in church history and in the scriptures. And we need to bring that out. And African Americans and Black people need to know that.
Amen. Right. And I want to add to that too.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes to the question about, why is there a need for urban apologetics, right? All the apologists that I know of, at least I'll just say the ones I know of, and most that when I've heard their testimonies, they center their apologetics, their areas of expertise or interest on the types of objections they encountered when they first encountered apologetics or the need for apologetics, right? So you have, people who are concerned about the quote so-called new atheism that you find flowing out of, primarily out of Europe. If that was your first encounter, like this idea that, God is on the same level as like fairies and stuff like that, that's the first kinds of objections that you ran into, to where you felt the need for apologetics, and your areas of study are going to gear toward that. And if you end up going on to being an apologist, it's probably going to be in relation to those kinds of arguments, right? So people tend to immerse themselves in areas of apologetics that they encounter. You have some people who encountered Muslims, and for whatever reason, wherever they lived or whatever, just the Muslim influence was high, or they just kept running to Muslims. And so they studied that. And they end up, I'm thinking about like a David Wood, for example, or, God bless him, he's passed on now, but the Bill Qureshi, same type of thing. I mean, that was his background. And so that's what you find, much of his focus was on. Right. So people tend to focus on their apologetics on the area of apologetics need that they encounter. Now, in our context, the need is very different. I encountered hip hop when I was like 9. You know what I'm saying? And I was being immersed in KRS-One, Rakim, Wu-Tang. I mean, I could go on, but these Afrocentric belief systems were present in my life through hip hop at a very early age. And then when I became older, I understood that these weren't just things that people were rapping about, but these are real like religions. And they were saying that Christianity is the white man's religion and so on and so forth. So that's what I interface with. That's what I interacted with.
That's right.
And so that's why, I see a need to focus on it. Now, with that being said, not to go on too long about it. When I first got into apologetics, I didn't start out in quote urban apologetics. You know what I'm saying? I was aware of it. I was aware there was a need, but I was rocking with William Lane Craig, and I still do. I was listening to all the apologists that that anybody else would listen to, and I was I'm not going to say the person's name, but I was listening to a podcast, and basically they were talking about this was a white guy who's an apologist, very good apologist. And he was talking about, he had to go to Africa, and he knew he was going to have to deal with the question of the white man's religion.
Right.
And he was talking about how he was going to approach it. And he had some good stuff. But, I started writing him a letter because I was like, you might want to address this area, address that area. I want to kind of give him some pointers from somebody who's dealt with that as some things he might want to look out for. And I got about 75% of the way through that letter. And I realized, like, why don't I address it? You know what I'm saying? Like, why am I waiting for this guy? This is not really in his wheelhouse. And I wouldn't expect it to be. Why don't if I interface with this all the time,
right?
Why don't I address it? And that's why I ended up starting the Tru-ID podcast. You see what I'm saying? And I think that's just the nature of it. Urban apologetics is important because there are a variety of types of objections to Christianity. That's right. We have people that, by God's providence, he's raising up and sending out laborers to address these various types of areas. And we should not away from that.
Well, Adam, we and Isaiah, we keep using this word context, and I think it's worth talking about that word and why we keep using it, especially as it relates to apologetics. And so one of the things that I find is often a misnomer, particularly among evangelicals, is this idea of culture. And so, for instance, when we read in the scriptures, the Bible says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world, for all that's in the world is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Come out from among them and be ye separated, and all this other stuff. Sometimes in Western evangelicalism, the idea of the world often gets confused with culture. And so people tend to think that culture is evil. Another prominent feature of evangelicalism is to believe that ethnicism and culture is something other than what is normally European standardization. So they won't tend to see how they express themselves as culturally. They will see what everybody else does as more cultural or ethnic. Well, the reality is that everybody expresses themselves in terms of the way that they feel, some of the things that they think, some of their ideas. All of those things come from cultural realities. And so culture is not necessarily an evil unless it obviously is against the scripture. But the reality is that contextualization is an attempt to present the gospel in culturally relevant ways. And so the reality is that urban apologetics attempts to answer the questions and deal biblically and theologically with many of the questions and the concerns that come from people within this culture. There are people from other cultures who are Christians that can answer some of those questions, but there are some more pressing, more relevant concerns that necessitates that we have an apologetic that is particularly aimed at the issues that are specific and particular to people from that culture. And so that's what you call contextualization. Now, there are people who might be listening who will say, oh, I don't agree with that. Well, you have to agree with that. If you don't agree with that, then you must not agree with the missionary movement, because that's what missionaries must learn to do. You cannot go to Africa and attempt to bring the gospel and, as a prerequisite to coming to Christ, teach people American culture. You have to contextualize the gospel in African ways. So not that you're changing the gospel, but that you are presenting it in ways that are relevant to them. We don't expect anything less than that when we hear the gospel. We hear it in ways that are culturally relevant to us. It's just that people who tend to standardize their culture always think culture is something other than what it is that they are doing. You see what I mean? It's almost like the Jewish idea. When Jews thought of themselves, the goy or the goyim was everybody culturally other. So it's Jews, and then there's everybody else, right? And so evangelicalism has kind of created a European standardization. It's the way we do it, and then there's everybody else. And the unfortunate thing is that that's not going to fly for everybody culturally. It is that I don't need to conform to white standards in order to come to Christ. I don't need to conform to white culture in order to be a believer. And so who's going to address the theological and the biblical concerns that come from somebody that is a culturally other? And that is what urban apologetics does. It aims at apologetics at a cultural center of people who have concerns and issues and questions from that particular culture. That's why it is contextual. Some seminaries just call it contextual apologetics, but that's all it really is. It's urban. Urban apologetics is one form of contextual apologetics. And so, I wanted to really kind of define that so that people understand that there is a legitimate basis for this. Yeah.
And I'm going to come back on that too, because, shout out to, Lisa Fields from Jude 3, who's obviously done great work out there. I know she's got a conference coming up. But anyway, she had a recent article, I think it was in Christianity Today, where, it was discussing, the need for urban apologetics. And one of the points that she was making in that article, in that interview is, when, as much as I love like a Ravi Zacharias or whoever it may be, when those guys quote C.S. Lewis, C.S. Lewis holds weight among a certain demographic. You know what I'm saying? If I go to, where I'm from, downtown Newport News, same place Michael Vick and Alan Iverson is from, and I'm quoting C.S. Lewis, they don't care nothing about C.S. Lewis. I love C.S. Lewis's writing. I got his books all around the crib right now. You know what I'm saying? But they don't know who he is, right? But the reason why Robbie will quote somebody like that is because C.S. Lewis would hold some weight with that audience, right? So for me, what I find myself doing is, sometimes I'm covering the same subjects, that some of these other apologists will cover, and I just quote somebody else. Like maybe instead of quoting C.S. Lewis, I might quote Dr. Martin Luther King or W.E.B. Du Bois or Damon Richardson or something like that. I'm quoting folks that come from that culture because they hold sway in that culture. Perfect example. Just to kind of make it plain, one of my favorite arguments for God's existence is the moral argument. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties don't exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. And in proving that second premise, many times apologists will refer to the Holocaust as an obvious example of something that's evil, and they use that to leverage, say, hey, therefore there's evil. Then there's evidence that there's a such thing as morality. Well, for me, in my context, I refer to chattel slavery rather than alluding to the Holocaust. I refer to chattel slavery because that was chattel slavery is going to hold more weight with the audience that I'm typically dealing with. You know what I'm saying? Those are just little subtle things where you see that contextualization. I would want people to check out the episodes of the Tru-ID podcast where we're dealing with the problem of evil. Just listen to the analogies that I use. Yeah. Right. I'm talking about, I just did one on the resurrection the other day. I used the Fresh Prince, in an analogy, you know what I'm saying? Like all those kinds of things, man, those things matter in terms of you as a good speaker, you want to be cognizant of who your audience is. Absolutely. And you want to use examples and analogies that are going to get you the most bang for the buck when dealing with those audiences. And it's just a different context. And we've got to be able to understand that, respect it, and then go out here and do some good work, not worrying about trying to, appease whatever other ethnicity or whatever culture. We got to do what's going to get the job done.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I remember reading some years ago a story of a missionary that was doing some work in the, I believe it was somewhere in Saudi Arabia, and they were sharing the gospel and again trying to make it culturally relevant, and so the person had heard a story, something that had recently happened, and found a way to take that story and relate it to the gospel. And so, these were Bedouin type people, nomadic people. So in other words, the same culture that you found in Abraham's day, that same culture still exists today among the Bedouin nomadic peoples of Saudi Arabia. These are desert people and of all kinds of faiths. A lot of them are not necessarily Muslim. There are all kinds of primitive faiths that they have, but the culture is still in place. Right. And so two Bedouin teenagers were throwing rocks at each other and playing, and one of them fell off of the cliff and died. And it was an accident, but the other friend who was responsible became afraid and he ran. And not long after that, a group of men from the village started running after him to chase him because they felt as though he was guilty of murdering his friend, even though it was an accident. Well, the young man found his way back into the village, and he ran to the tent of the tribal chief, and he grabbed hold of the tent peg and grabbed hold of it and began to plead for mercy. Well, the tribal chief came out and brought him into his tent. And so when the men of the town, the village, came, they began to call for the boy to come out so that they could stone him. And the chief came out of the tent and said, no, I'm not going to turn him over to you guys. He's under my protection now. And they began to plead, you don't understand, he's responsible for killing the boy. And the chief said, no, he's under my protection now. And so one of them said, no, you really don't understand. The boy that he killed was your only son. And so the tribal chief had a moment of pause there, and he started really thinking about it. And a few seconds later, he speaks up and he says, in our way of life, in our way of culture, when a person seeks refuge and protection, they grab hold of the tent peg of the tribal chief. And the tribal chief makes a decision about whether or not they're going to throw their protection on that person. And he says, I have thrown my protection on this young man. And now that I don't have a son any longer, he is going to be my son. Wow. And my inheritance is going to belong to him. My name is going to belong to him.
Come on, man.
And my protection belongs to him.
Wow.
Now, this was a story that had come out of that area. Wow. And so when the missionary heard it, he said, well, that's how I'm going to share the gospel with these men. Right. Because that is exactly what Jesus did. That's exactly what the Father did, is that we are all responsible for killing his son. But as a result of the death of his son, he has thrown the righteousness of Christ on us. He has thrown over us his justification. His name is now our name. We have been adopted into his family, and now are we the sons of God. Yeah. And so we have, the Bible says in the book of Isaiah that it says of the Messiah that he is a sure peg. And so what have we done? We have grabbed hold of the sure peg, and we have pleaded for the mercy of God on the person of Jesus Christ, and he has given us his protection so that we are spared of his wrath. And so all of the accusers that are out there that are saying we are guilty, they are absolutely right. But the Father has thrown his, see, that's contextualization right there. That's contextualization. And that's exactly
open.
What we are doing.
I'm gonna be watching live streams on Sunday morning. I guarantee you, Isaiah Robertson and Jason Laplanche is gonna preach that same thing that's coming Sunday. You just wrote their whole sermon for them right there. That's
contextualization in a Bedouin culture, and that is exactly what urban apologetics does contextually. Is that we are dealing with people who speak a different language. And we've got to be missionaries to that culture. And we can't assume that everybody thinks the same, behaves the same, so forth and so on. And so hopefully we have provided an adequate justification for what urban apologetics, which is again a type of contextual apologetics, what it's really all about and why we need to really pull this community together around essential doctrines. Yeah.
I think that we have done our job as urban apologists, and we can officially say, okay, the movement has succeeded and achieved its goal of helping everybody to understand what you just said, Damon, when HB Charles can go to the G3 conference and pull it,
right?
And everybody at the G3 conference will rejoice.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
I think that's what the urban apologetics movement can say. Now, I don't think it'll ever happen on this side. Glory.
Right.
But think about that. Think about that, right?
That's right.
This point about culture, right, and contextualization, right? HB Charles at the G3 conference has to tone it down a bunch in order to be heard. However, the opposite isn't true. If John MacArthur came to my church, which is predominantly Black, Sunday, they would hear John MacArthur. They would listen to John MacArthur.
That's right.
So, however,
and he doesn't have to tone his culture down. Yeah.
What's that? Yes. In order for HB Charles to be accepted and received at the G3 conference, he's got to turn the volume down to about 2 instead of 10.
Right.
And so, I think that's a good example of sort of what we're talking about. This cultural divide that urban apologists see clearly. Other people don't see it. Other people are willfully ignoring it. But urban apologists understand that. Look, we've got to go to the culture that's being marginalized. It's kind of being ostracized, even in some cases. And we've got to take this message and communicate it in the way that they understand. And so that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good stuff, man.
Hey,
well,
man.
I think we've come to the, as boys to men would say, we've come to the end of the road.
There you go. Okay, right.
I think Jay might have fallen off to sleep.
Yeah, I think he's out, man. He been asleep for about an hour now, man. He was gone, bro. He was gone. He woke up during the part where you was preaching, though. I think he woke up at that part.
Oh man! See, all we needed was the Hammond B3. And listen,
right.
Somebody needs to jump on the organ when HB or somebody is at the G3. Somebody just needs to fire it up one time.
Just do it.
And see what happens.
Right.
You want to know? What would happen? All of those frozen chosen cats will get up and walk straight out.
They might catch something, huh?
I tell you what won't happen. He won't be up in there no more. That'd be the last time.
If HB wasn't at the G3 conference, we will never see HB at the G3 conference ever again.
Oh wow! You know, that's sad. But
I want him to do it though. Like I want him to do it. I want him so bad to go to the G3 conference and say,
oh man, that would be one for the culture, I guess, huh? One for the team.
Do it for the culture, man.
Do it for the culture. Oh man, so I'm not sure how this video. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was saying I was going to throw it out there. I mean, I guess I can start it off, but I don't want to sound like too much of a broken record, but again, this is about we have work to do. We have a great deal of work to do, and God is calling people to do it. And basically, we want to be as effective as possible. I believe that the urban apologetics community is far more effective when we operate under biblical unity than it will otherwise be. And so therefore we want to, as a community, we're putting it on the table. We're 4 guys putting it on the table of the community saying, let's be intentional about, fostering that unity. And, the central way that we need to do that is to make sure that the essentials are in place, that, we know what Christianity is, and that we're all on the same page, same sheet of music. That's really what this comes down to. And if we do that, then we'll be able to move forward. And also, when we do have conflict, that's going to happen. Family fight. We know how that goes. But if we're going to do it, let's fight fair. Let's fight with honor, and let's make sure that we're interacting with each other in a way that's orderly, not getting out of control, so that we're not, giving the gospel a black eye. We want to put our best foot forward. and get out here and get it done, y'all. I don't know if I hope we recorded this, man, because I might just post this as an episode on Tru-ID, because I want to make sure that this gets out. I think this is a powerful
I think Jay, well, we're using his Zoom. It is recording according to that flashing light, and
okay, cool, yeah, all right,
you'll have to just upload it to Facebook, and then it can be pretty much uploaded to YouTube or wherever from there. But I think this was a really important conversation tonight for sure. And we definitely covered. And again, it looks like most people are pretty much in agreement saying, yes, it's a long time coming. We definitely need to get some structure and some direction, some order to, what we're doing in apologetics contextually in an urban context. And I'm glad to be part of. I think we're already on the right track in that it's not a movement of clerics. It's a grassroots movement, and again, that's where apologetics should rightfully end up anyway. Right. When Peter says, "Be ready to give an answer," I don't think he was just talking to the bishops and the elders. I think he was talking to the general populace of believers as they were in parts of Southern Asia and Turkey and scattered them in the diaspora. He's talking to all of them and he's saying, hey, you gotta, and so I think that's where we get it right in terms of urban apologetics. It hasn't started out with the Ravi Zachariases or the Craig Blombergs or whatever. It hadn't started out with them. It started out with everyday Bible-believing, Spirit-filled, Christ-loving believers understanding the responsibility to be able to articulate the what and the whys of their faith. So at the end of the day, it doesn't need to move away from that. It just needs to have some direction. And I think that's where having people associated with urban apologetics who do have a more scholarly approach to understanding the Word of God and Scripture can really help bring some direction to that community. But we don't want to take it away from that community because, again, at the end of the day, we want it to be grassroots. We want it to be. That's right. You know what I mean? Yeah. Right, at least that's what I believe.
Absolutely. Yeah. Urban apologetics is its own animal. You know what I'm saying? It's in many ways an extension or a re-representation of the hip hop community. You know what I'm saying? It carries with it that kind of edge. There's a lot. I could go further with that, but it's its own entity. And I think that we can, really appreciate that. But I agree with you. Definitely needs direction in order to ensure that we'll continue to be effective. Right.
Absolutely. Man, I tell you. Go ahead. No. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just as I was just kind of again just looking through the comment section, there's so many people that we all interact with. And the fact that, just think about it, man, it's 2 a.m. here on the East Coast. And we've got people that are up as a part of this conversation, right. And they're part of that conversation as well as it takes place in community, whether that's online or whether that's in local churches. I'm just looking on here. You got, brother Baran and brother Jaqueline, and you've got
what up, Jaqueline?
Yeah. You've got brother Corey. You've got I see brother Jason on here, and
I think Tim Allison on there. Shout out to Tim Allison.
Brother Berean's on here. Pastor Felix Moulton, Calvinistic Don. Quite a number of people. I don't want to overlook because I can't scroll all the way back and see Tim Allison. I see quite a number of people. Pastor Troy Goss from New Orleans, and quite a number of people have been in and out. But these are people and others who interact with us all the time. And we're all influencing each other. So I think we owe it to the community of those who are normally interacting with each other to ensure that we've got some safeguards around it theologically and doctrinally, and to even see. I think I saw Sister Courtney came on. I see there's some young ladies that have really been taking up urban apologetics and have been doing it, on the West Coast and, in New York and various places. And so, there's a lot of diversity. I'm interacting with a lot now of Hispanic urban apologists that, again, they're watching all of these kinds of videos and they're applying that to their communities as well. And so I think we have done an incredible job of influencing all kinds of people. There's some brothers on here that are from South Africa that I communicate with them all the time, and they're always talking about some of the theological issues in South Africa.
I've had the same experience. Very true. Yeah. A couple people hit me out from South Africa. You're right. Before I forget to shout out to Nefertiti. That's another sister who's out there.
Absolutely.
But you're right. I mean, we've had an influence, and I think it can only go up from here. You know what I'm saying? I think that we just need to manage what we have in a responsible way. Be good stewards.
Exactly.
What it is that God has afforded. I know back. Some people may know or may not, but I did gospel rap back in the day. And I remember back in, your early 2000s, maybe kind of mid 2005, somewhere like that, the schism between Reformed and non-Reformed really impacted the gospel rap community. I mean, it was to the point where, like, if you wasn't Reformed, like, some cats wouldn't even sell you a beat and stuff like that. Wouldn't even sell you an instrumental. I mean, it was deep, you know what I'm saying? Or they wouldn't invite you to certain shows and things like that, And I think that some of what we are seeing now in the CHH community is as a result of that schism, that beef that didn't really get resolved. I think that the Cross movie did a great job of setting a standard in gospel rap, and then people took that and created a barrier, between folks, and I think that it just became a problem. And I just don't want to see the same thing happen in urban apologetics.
Oh, that's a really good analogy. A really good. Not even an analogy. A historical point.
That's really what happened.
Yeah. I see it a lot like the CHH movement. Young, what did they call it? What was the term? Young, restless, and reformed. And, and but I see it a lot in that way. But unfortunately, you are right. There are those schisms. Again, you look at mainstream hip hop. The East Coast, West Coast battle, and how that brought about the death of hip hop. It produced stuff like mumble rap now. It almost killed the whole culture. But again, and that's what we don't want to see happen. We don't want to see urban apologetics killed at the hands of people who think that because you are Arminian in your theology that you're not a brother in Christ.
Come on, man.
That's divisive. I can't have solid fellowship with people who are denying the fellowship, who are denying brothers and sisters fellowship because they have secondary and tertiary disagreements. I mean, hands down, if you deny the resurrection, bodily resurrection of Jesus, the resurrection of the just and the wicked and all that other stuff, then we can't have authentic fellowship. But if it's a matter of whether or not you're a covenantalist or a dispensationalist, you're still my brother and sister in Christ, and we cannot have any toleration for people who are going to take to the mic or to Facebook and call people heretics because you know what I mean? You don't hold the same eschatological view as they do. You know what I mean?
Damon, I would even side eye somebody that claims that if you don't embrace a particular soteriological systematic, you're not saved, because essentially when you do that, when you say that, what you're denying is, we're saved by Christ alone, right? You're essentially saying it's not by Christ alone, it's by Christ and this systematic that you're saying, Christ and Calvinism or Christ and Arminianism. So you're actually implicitly denying one of the solas, right?
Right.
By saying you're saved by Christ and believing this particular soteriological perspective.
Right.
So I'm side-eyeing you at that point.
Ah, that's good.
Because it's no longer Christ alone. It's Christ and this theological litmus test.
Yeah.
So,
well, you know, we one of the things that we didn't talk about was the 5 solas. Now, typically, that doesn't come up on people's essentials radars. Their radar of essential Christian doctrines. But one of the reasons why we wanted to add that to our doctrinal statement is because, as we have discussed, it's one of those ways that we ensure that the movement remains a Protestant movement, because we definitely value, we want to protect the truths that came out of the Reformation, what they were adamant about reclaiming. We don't want that lost to a movement that says, well, those things are not important. So for instance, this doctrinal statement is going to include that salvation is by sola gratia, right? That is by grace alone. Amen. It is also by sola fide. That is by faith alone, or through faith alone. Right. It is also solus Christus. That is through Christ alone. It is also to the glory of God alone, and of course, by the scriptures alone, which is the authority, the final authority on all matters of faith and practice. Now, those are essential. All of those things, while they may not, well, I should say, those things are essential in and of themselves, because at the end of the day, they all point to an essential understanding of the gospel. Those 5 solas are all about embracing what is essential about the gospel. When we say that it is by grace alone, through faith alone, we're saying apart from works. You can't be in this community if you believe that salvation is by faith and by works. It's got to be by faith alone. So there should be literally no disagreement among the 5 solas. You don't have to be Reformed or Calvinistic to agree with the 5 solas. If you are a Protestant Christian, an evangelical Christian, whatever you want to call yourself, if you're a Bible believing Christian, embracing the 5 solas should not be, there's nothing culturally particular about the 5 solas.
Yeah, let me say about that point. This goes back to something that Isaiah said earlier, that I think that in the Reformed community, people who are Reformed tend to be more aware of their theological heritage than folks who are not Reformed. You know, I think it's just, for whatever reason, so I think that what happens is those who are non-Reformed, because Reformed cats tend to be in touch with their theological heritage and can articulate it, what happens is that becomes the predominant voice from which you hear things like the 5 solas, which really are not a part of any soteriological system, right? That's right. It's something that any believer can hold to. And as you pointed out the other day, it's, when you look at the literature, it is something that was espoused by, various Protestants of different soteriological stripes. So I think that, what happens is, people assume that the Reformed cats have cornered the market, have a monopoly on the 5 solas. And that's just not the case. I mean, you shouldn't have some kind of apprehension towards the 5 solas just because the predominant voice from which you hear it may be, Reformed folks. I think it's just that simple. Absolutely. So, somebody like myself, I wouldn't fit squarely within the Reformed community, as Isaiah, pointed out earlier, but I have no problem affirming the 5 solas. Like, why would I have a problem with grace alone? By faith. I mean, it's literally says that in the scripture. Like, why would anybody have a problem with that? Why would if you have a problem with, the scriptures being the arbiter of, life and practice, for a Christian, then you have a problem with church history and what Jesus established through his Holy Spirit. So, I mean, it's just, these aren't things that should cause people to have pause, and assuming that, oh, well, it's a reform type of a deal. No, we're just laying out, some things that are descriptive of what Christianity is like. Absolutely. And I think that, I just want to reiterate, I think that in some regards, when we kind of list these things out, I would encourage people who are not reformed to study up. You know what I'm saying? Study up, or whatever theological tradition, you come from, study up on it. Think about it critically, you know what I'm saying, so that you know what it is that you stand on, and have, if you hold to it, at least you've thought it through. Right. Thoroughly before you start claiming stuff.
Right. And there'll be people who will sign these, this doctrinal statement. Some of them are Pentecostal, charismatic. Some of them are from Reformed tradition. Some from the various Armenian traditions like Wesleyan and Nazarene, Methodist kind of a tradition. None of those things will have any bearing on the essentials, because that's typically something that a lot of people, when they talk about denominationalism, they put a lot of emphasis on theological differences and that kind of fracturing. But when you really look at it, the denominational picture, denominationally, most Christians agree on the essentials. And we're not talking about the liberal denominations. They went off, they derailed a long time ago, but we're talking about your theologically, how can I put it? Theologically, most of your conservative denominations, whether they're Baptists or whatever they are, there's a lot of agreement around the areas of essential matters of the Christian faith. Typically, where disagreements lie are, they're usually in some areas of maybe eschatology, or how we articulate salvation, or what have you, or even church governance, what kind of ecclesiology you have, or whatever. But usually none of those issues are detrimental to the faith, is what I'm trying to say. And
right. So, you want to know what I would like to see?
Yeah.
If cats carry on Calvinism versus Arminianism debates, you really know, if you understand your opponent's perspective, if you can argue their position. Mm-hmm. So why don't y'all flip it? The person that's a synergist, why don't you argue like a monergist? And the person that's a monergist, why don't you argue like a synergist? And that's how you really test whether or not you understand what you're arguing against in the first place.
Very good point.
I mean,
very good point.
The reality is cats hear about Calvinism, they hear about, whatever, dispensationalism, whatever. They hear about it, and because it's foreign to them, because they've never really researched it, they automatically take umbrage and they want to attack it.
Right.
And it becomes heated, it becomes divisive. But that you understand a position or a perspective when you can step into that perspective and argue accurately from that perspective, even though you don't embrace it. And you know what happens?
Yeah.
If you can do that, I guarantee you'll become more gracious.
That's good.
I guarantee you'll become more humble, right? Because you'll understand the nuances. You'll understand that the caricatures and the straw men that you've created, that they really are just that, caricatures and straw men, and you'll be more cordial and warm in your dialogue when you attempt to step into that other person's perspective.
That's
so
good.
Why don't we see that?
I would love to see that.
One of y'all cats out there, do that.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
That'll be good.
Yeah. That's good.
Actually, I know we're all from the Black church, man, because we're on our third closing already. That's we said we're so close.
I'm about to go to my seat.
We've been to the seat and back about 4 times.
Oh man, well, I enjoyed this. I'm not quite sure how it's going to end in terms of how he's going to turn the end the Facebook.
Oh, I got it. He made me the host.
Okay,
So,
good deal.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to lay this out here, just as a suggestion, so that people kind of know where this is going. Again, I'm gonna throw my email out there. If you have any thoughts about this conversation, hit me up at Tru-ID7@gmail. That's TRUID, the number 7 at gmail.com. And then I can, forward that, if, your thoughts and stuff to, Damon and whoever else, becomes a part of this conversation. And I think what we need to do is, as things progress, like, maybe as we, draft these theological points out more explicitly and in a more detailed way, we can have another one of these conversations and just so people can kind of see how things are moving along. Right. So that way, by the time the final product is out there, people will have known, just the whole process and how it's looked.
Yeah, good deal.
That'd be my recommendation. Yeah.
We can learn a lot from Paul and Barnabas in Acts chapter 15. Though they had a heated disagreement over John Mark, you don't see Barnabas anathematizing Paul. You don't see Paul anathematizing Barnabas. They go their separate ways. However, they continue spreading the gospel. And there's an understanding that, look, we might have this disagreement, but we're brothers in Christ. And that's what a document like this will produce. Look, we disagree on this, but we're brothers in Christ. And that's what we're all after.
That's right. Good point. That's a really good point.
That's a great point, man.
Their disagreement was not theological. It was operational, if you will.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so they don't go separate ways as brothers. They go separate ways in ministry, mm-hmm. so that the ministry can continue to function without any kind of strife. So they did what they thought was in the best interest of the furtherance of the gospel, so as that their personalities would not, their personal conflict would not be a hindrance. So a lot of people kind of misread that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes it goes down as unresolved conflict and immature, and they split up and they just couldn't work it out. I think they were mature enough to realize that what's really most important in this critical infantile stage of the church is that we advance the gospel and we not allow our conflict to become any further of a hindrance. Right. And so they made they made an executive decision, a judgment call to do what was best for the advancement of the gospel, not because they were both so hot-headed that they just couldn't work together. And so there's absolutely no doubt that Barnabas continued to spread the gospel where he went. And we know what Paul, since Luke continued to keep the camera rolling on Paul, we know what Paul continued to do. So that's really, really good. And that's a good model for how we ought to be able to deal with some of the intramural in-house debates. We don't divide over those. We love each other, and we continue to be passionate in our discussion. So yeah, that's real.
Man. I tell people all the time, man. For anybody who's watched the Luke Cage series on Netflix,
I love that, man.
yeah. Like the Tru-ID podcast, I look at it as being like Pop's barbershop. I'm saying it's Switzerland. I'm saying, like, everybody should be able to come and be cool. It's a no violence zone. You know what I'm saying? And I want to extend that vibe. I want that vibe to extend to the entire urban apologetics community.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're gonna have conflict, and I understand that, but it should be a conflict among brethren at the end of the day.
Yeah. There's rules to this. Nobody gets whacked.
There you go.
Right. Without the decision of the council. No, I'm just playing.
Amen. All right, brother. 220. This has been a great discussion.
Definitely, man.
Yo, Damon, on the low, man, we need to hop on eventually, man, and do that discussion that we talked about, a reformed or reform-leaning Black church network that's
Absolutely.
culturally Black. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm with it, man.
That's just a little drop breadcrumbs a little bit for that. But appreciate you, brothers.
Yes, indeed.
And
we'll get with Jay, man, to solidify the Truth Summit in Boston. Maybe we can later this morning, or I should say later in the day, get with him just so that we can make sure that all the logistics are together. So
yeah. All right, brothers.
Hey, love y'all, brothers, man. Y'all take it easy.
Love
man.
y'all too. Peace out. Have a good one. Bye-bye.